So, as I was saying, before joining Trend Micro 6.5 years ago, I worked 20 years in the United States Secret Service, working in and leading many different programs there, cybersecurity programs, and I was ultimately the CISO before leaving. At Trend Micro, I've been working and doing a lot of different things, and one of the areas that I work or find the most passion around is working with our threat and vulnerability researchers, but also our product development folks and our R&D side of the house. So Trend Micro, if you don't know about Trend Micro, it's a cybersecurity solutions provider that's been around for over 30 years. And we started in AV, but we have products and solutions that bridge the gap from endpoint, network, cloud, IoT, email, web gateway. We pretty much have a security solution for just about every problem that organizations have. So what's the problem? Well, the problem set is obviously everybody knows, and we all live in, is this explosive growth of cybersecurity challenges when it comes to cyber threat and cyber attacks. And so they always come in different flavors, around usually 4 different ones, right? Cyber espionage actors, cyber criminal actors, cyber hacktivists, and cyber terrorists, which, thankfully we don't have that much activity around that. But, here, when you think about educational institutions, they are affected by all, right? So early on, they were affected much more, I would say, on the cyber espionage intellectual property problem, because obviously for institutions that are R1 institutions that really, bank on and funding their programs through the research that they do. So when you think about, as we were talking about earlier, higher educational institutions have a huge problem. They're micro cities. It's a microcosm of society itself, because here we have disparate groups and users across the board. You have students, you have faculty, you have researchers, you have folks, vendors that work on campus, you have external or online students that are from around the globe. So you have services that are being offered at education institutions that are just, expands that attack surface and provides great opportunities for cyber threat actors. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't matter. It could be cybercrime for financial gain, or it could be for cyber espionage, right? And so this is where we're at when it comes to what are the threats that higher ed really faces. And that has just been exploding. So some of the trends, so what's at risk, as I mentioned, you have money, intellectual property, PII, medical records, and not just for higher educational institutions that have possibly teaching hospitals, but you just have student and student medical facilities and clinics and so forth on campus. Fraud, you have identity theft issues and problems, disruption of operations, i.e. From a ransomware or hacktivist perspective. As I mentioned, you have research, you have sabotage, you have disgruntled students and or faculty and or potentially even vendors on campus. And then obviously blackmail. So the risk is just about anything you can think of on the book that faces educational institutions. What do they prey on? Well, it's the human error aspect, right? And we'll get into that in a little bit. But it's, we always talk about, from an OSI model, 7 layers. Well, the 8th layer is the human or the carbon layer. And it's not just those that are at the forefront of being targeted from a social engineering perspective, but it's also those individuals that are on the infrastructure side that possibly are not configuring and securing and updating and patching critical systems that everybody needs to utilize, again, from researchers to faculty to students. Then IT security complacency, right? Now you talk about a shadow IT or attack surface problem. Higher ed is is a huge ground for those issues and problems, right? technical deficiencies, as I mentioned, vulnerabilities that go on and do not get patched in a timely manner. So you look at what attackers are looking for is those seams, right? And to be able to go after those seams and exploit those seams within organizations. And once they're inside a network, obviously it's first and foremost, they want to be able to establish a beachhead, but it's continuing their access, right? When you think about a higher educational institution, you have all these disparate systems that hopefully are architected correctly and can be able to establish a zero trust model. And we'll go into that a little later as far as recommendations. But they want to establish access and they want to move around laterally and gain administrative privileges. They want to move slowly and quietly to map the entire network and look for open ports and locate the crown jewels. And as I mentioned, the crown jewels can vary. So some of the tactics utilized, and again, this is not, and some of the things that we're covering now is not just obviously, the TTPs associated with higher ed. Obviously, this goes through broader sectors and the issues that every sector, deals with. Extensive intelligence gathering before an attack. Obviously, from higher education institutions, you have a lot of social media out there, not only for intended and unintended, right? So intended, you have research projects, you have awards and grants that are communicated out in the public and social media space around what's going on campus. But also you have the individual students' social media, and then you also have faculty social media. Collaboration between groups, you have counter incident response used extensively. So collaboration between groups is, sort of when you look at what it is now, crime as a service, it is one of these things that these cyber criminal groups, from a cyber crime perspective, operate and collaborate on a daily basis to be able to then effectively attack organizations like higher ed and sectors like higher ed. And so attacks will cross many areas of the network. And then island hopping supply chain attacks. Well, supply chain attacks is in the news. We talk about it from Log4j, SolarWinds. Truly a challenge that every organization out there is facing and needs to be addressed, obviously, from when you're looking at developing your cybersecurity plan and solutions, right? Commonalities seen in attacks, obviously weak credentials, that is spoken about all the time. Weak passwords and or the lack of using a multi-factor authentication. Outdated and unpatched OS and applications. We'll see that with the challenges that we have, again, with Log4j and then SolarWinds. Again, it is critical. The time to exploit the vulnerabilities once they're disclosed, where it used to be 30 days, now we're talking about days or hours before there is an exploit in the wild around those vulnerabilities. Advanced detection technologies not enabled. I think this is the biggest challenge that we see from our customers as well, is the fact that we try to partner with them from the beginning to the end, from throughout that sales process, but also implementation, which is critical. Because obviously, if any security product, much less ours or any others, is not actually implemented correctly, then you basically might as well not have any solution, right, if it's not implemented correctly. And then you have solutions that are purchased and become shelfware, right? They're not being deployed at all, right, for whatever reason. Misconfigurations, exactly what I was alluding to earlier, is also, the IT complacency issue that I mentioned in the previous slides. It is this notion that oftentimes, especially when we're talking about cloud is a big challenge, because there's this natural assumption that because any service or application that is being run in the cloud is, secure because it's in the cloud. And that's not true, because it's really cloud is a shared responsibility, right? It's the concept where your cloud service provider provides security to a certain level, and then companies like ours provide security beyond that minimal security that's provided by your cloud service providers. So misconfigurations is big key, and identifying those misconfigurations, early on as part of our risk insights is key, right? So identifying those misconfigurations before the problem happens. So unsecured devices. And then obviously on a campus, unsecured devices means a lot of different things, right? You could talk about labs, you could talk about everything. Those are the problems that you have, right? It could be the devices that are brought onto campus for students, but also the devices used in stand-up systems and or labs that are accidentally put into production. Big challenges for institutions. And then ransomware is the last revenue option. This is also another commonality seen in attacks. Ransomware attacks are changing. Early on in 2015, 16, you saw these attacks really pivot from the locker variant into the crypto ransomware ones that we see today. Initial infections meant the ransomware actual release and impact was immediately. Now we see, with the bigger problem, what we see in 2021 and now in 2022 is this postmodern ransomware attack, where you see the actual implementation rather and delivery of the ransomware at the end, the last stage of an attack. All right, and so instead of being one of the first two steps of the of an attack, now they're doing everything at the end. Meaning, what they're doing is they're compromising network and system. They're moving laterally. They're compromising infrastructure and going deeper with an organization to identify that critical data. But once they have it, they exfiltrate the data and then they encrypt it. They exfiltrate copies, but then they encrypt data that still resides there on the network. So it's a double extortion problem, and it's a big problem that all organizations are affecting, but higher ed as well. And so you have also access as a service that allows cyber criminal undergrounds the way they are right now. They're incredibly mature, especially the Russian-speaking cyber criminal undergrounds, where you actually have different services being provided to other cyber criminal groups and networks, right? So there, instead of a B2B issue, it's a C2C, criminal to criminal problem that we have. And in doing so, they're able to scale these types of attacks because now they have these affiliate types of groups that are able to sell different types of services and or malware or other types of tools to other cyber criminal actors. So as I mentioned, they target critical systems. They attack across the entire network infrastructure, like I mentioned, and they are also doing anti-forensics, right, to improve their ability to maintain their persistence, but also be able to evade detection. So the ransomware target selection, you name the sector, but primarily, education is one of the main targets, right? Because what they've noticed is that anything from a government or manufacturing or retail, say government, manufacturing, and education haven't been traditional areas where this type of attack would actually resonate. But because it's a operational focused attack, in other words, operational risk, higher educational institutions are part of that target selection as they identify which ones provide the best return on investment. So typical ransomware attack scenario, they compromise or they gain a foothold usually through compromised accounts that they've bought online within cyber criminal networks within the deep web, spear phishing campaigns, and or through some exposed internet vulnerability. But then they deliver different tools to do so, right? From a spear phishing, they're dropping emotet and trickbot malware. And they're moving then laterally across the network, for example. They're living off the land more and more, living off the tools that already reside within a network and sysadmin tools and so forth. One for twofold. One to keep it lean and move forward to evade detection primarily, and so it eases their process to make a much better or much more effective attack. And then you have data exfiltration stages, and then ransomware deployment, like I mentioned at the end. So what can customers do? Well, customers, primarily, it's all about, what we talk about, people, process, technology, and how everything is linked, right, between the three. Right here it mentions it's around 80%, 90% of most breaches that we see are around social engineering attacks. Meaning it could be a phishing email or smishing, or now we'll get into the other types of here in a minute. But the people problem is alive and well and provides a huge challenge. Here we blocked over 48 billion threats blocked annually. We did about 48 billion last year in 2021. But the other thing, as I mentioned, is the people problem is on your those that are hardening your infrastructure and protecting your systems, right? If those are not being monitored and patched on a timely manner, it creates a huge problem. So the people is not just your users within, say, higher ed, be it teachers, faculty, or researchers. Now we're talking about those that are tasked to secure and harden your infrastructure at these higher educational institutions. So as I mentioned, the different ways is phishing, vishing. You see it's a phone-based phishing attack. That is on the rise. You probably have gotten phone calls yourself. I know I have around vishing. And then that's going to continue to increase when you look at deepfake. We talk about deepfake videos, but the deepfake audios is just another tool that's going to be then leveraged here, and it already has been on these types of attacks, especially business email type of attacks, where these communications between, the CEO and a CFO, or the impersonating the CEO and the CFO communications. You can see that, if you deploy a deepfake audio file left on the CFO's voicemail, then you could potentially think that you can actually increase the likelihood of those attacks happening. So vishing, smishing, and obviously in-person deception and impersonations. So all of this is, the impersonation in person, obviously, this is where the social engineering attacks, that could be anybody trying to gain access to your your data centers, and anywhere your infrastructure is, right? So all of this from a social engineering perspective still predominates, like I mentioned, 80% to 90% of attacks that we see.
Hey, Ed, it's Ron Gerber.
Yes.
As you go through this, and we're getting to the end, but I just want to interrupt quickly. There are a couple of questions. And I'm also going to maybe ask Sebastian from AWS to chime in. The first question from Colin from the state of Rhode Island, who had a question on fiber optic transmissions that are so critical, and how do you go about securing the transmission of data, both within, let's say, a closed loop, and also when you've got individuals who are accessing a consumer-oriented fiber network? What is the solution, be it encryption? And maybe I'll ask you, Ed, and you, Sebastian, if you're listening, to comment on how do you integrate security with regard to the transmission network.
Well, I'll just jump in a sense that from when you talk about fiber, the one good thing is to essentially tap into fiber is a much harder proposition. Not that it is impossible, it can be done, but to physically tap into a fiber optic channel is one of these things that the level of admission is high. So that's good. So when you talk about risk, it's likelihood and impact. And obviously impact, when you're able to then compromise, say, a fiber optic channel, then obviously impact is high, but to get there, and the likelihood is a bit lower. Now, actually compromising any data prior to going over fiber, then that's just the software and network security solutions and problems that you have to solve. But I'll push it back if Colin wants to jump in.
Now, let me just ask Sebastian, because I know AWS owns a couple of 100,000 miles of fiber or something like that. Maybe you could comment on how AWS, which is almost the transmission gateway, how it protects data before it then gets filtered by Trend Micro and accessed by end users.
Yes, hello everyone. So we look at the security as kind of a layered solution. So really looking at all of the aspects of how the information is to be protected, all the way from who has access to it and kind of how to apply that fine-grained protection through monitoring and identifying that something is actually going on that needs to be actually investigated, all the way to the encryption, right? So kind of looking at all of those aspects together. Really, that's kind of our usual approach to make sure that it's comprehensive, and we have solution for every layer of that protection. So I'll expand a little bit on security in my presentation as well, and I'll take any follow-ups then if we need to dive a little bit deeper in a specific fiber optics and kind of how to protect the networks themselves.